I think I'm one of the two people from the UK here. So we have I noticed yesterday we have a linguistics issue. I mean, High Street you might want to replace with Main Street, but I've got this title, but it is quite liberally interpreted. I've got a few other linguistic issues as I go along. But basically I want to explore the online retailing and the decision-making processes of leading UK retailers, but put it in a much broader context about trying to look at how retailing and the retail hierarchy is changing. So I thought we'd start with some context, because I have been struck by listening to the talks how it's very different in some parts of the US and so on. Because we always think in the US is ahead of us in the UK in terms of retailing. But anyway, we have decentralisation just like everybody else, characterised, it's often characterised by waves, starting with supermarkets beginning in the 70s. Then we have retail warehouses, which I think you call power centres, from the 1980s, which started with DIY and white goods being sold in these big boxes. Then this morphed into retail parks or power centres, and then they became more fashion oriented, certainly in the last 10-15 years. And we've also had the growth of out-of-town town centres, which you probably call malls. This is an interesting table, I thought, which sort of illustrates the sort of significance of how the portfolios. I've come from a real estate background, so I've got here, this is the portfolios of finance institutions in the UK, so that we can see how they've changed over the years. So Standard Shop amounted to 60% almost of all retail investment in 1981. And strangely, retail warehouses, which hardly existed then, were about 2.4%. But by the time we get to 2014 now, we're talking about 40% almost retail warehouses. That's the most common retail form as far as investment is concerned. Shopping centres have declined a bit, but the big change is in standard shops. And here I'm thinking, when we're talking about real estate portfolios, I'm really thinking about town centres and city centres. So you can see there's a huge drop in the number of standard shops, and the number of reasons for that is in particular that small shops have become really obsolescent in the UK because the major retailers want bigger shops. So if we look at the sort of underlying reasons for this, we've got historic influences, obviously incomes, real incomes. From the Second World War we had huge increase in real incomes, and that means we needed more shops. We had suburbanisation of the population too, and all this is obviously linked to greater car use, creating flexibility, making shopping trips more complex, and maybe involved other activities too. And one of the big losers in all this is small towns. So small towns are basically suffering from the fact that you can now travel much easier in your car up to the regional shopping centres or the out-of-town shopping malls on the edge of the regional shopping centres, and we call that out shopping. So essentially we've got a reframing of the retail hierarchy, particularly since the 1990s, I would say, where the small towns have really lost out, and they've got lots of big shops closing. Then we've got the ubiquitous fashion brands which we see everywhere across the world these days, and they're all demanding larger units, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. So where does online come into all this? Well, online shopping seems to me basically obviously is a threat to physical shopping. To begin with, it didn't seem too bad because it was mainly people buying books and DVDs, and it was a small percentage of the high street, hardly any bookshops on the high street. Later online in the UK, as it was being said in previous presentation, high street retailers are integrating the internet. So what we call it click and collect. Click and collect is where you collect the goods from your store. Click and deliver is mainly food, where you order from the supermarket and they deliver. And it's now all called omni-channel shopping, which someone my age, I'm not really quite sure what it is. And this slide gives us an indication of what's been happening to online in the UK. So, and you can see we start from 2008 and we end up in sort of September 2018. And we can see that 2% of food was being bought online in 2008 and it's still only 5.8%. But clothing is the big change there, 4.1%, and it's grown dramatically to 18.2%. And it's been growing consistently, 4% in 2 years, so that's almost 4% in 2 years. Household goods are not as significant, so it's mainly fashion, but the overall figure here is that we've actually gone from 4.4% in 2008 of total non-food online sales to 14% in 2018, i.e. now. So that's quite a big jump really in 10 years. And so as I said, the response has been this multi-channel, omni-channel, click and collect. It's not quite clear yet, I think. The pace of change has been, we're not quite clear yet what is going to happen. Though, as I show in the later slides, it does seem to be emerging. What we did was we interviewed 3 of the UK major retailers. These are Debenhams and John Lewis, a big department store, and Next is the largest fashion retailer in the UK. And we were looking at, first of all, looking at the shop network of Next, and then talking to them. And here, this is my retail hierarchy view of Next stores. So you can see that what we call the high street, 61 shops in the high street, only 11.9% of the stores there. And then you've got retail parks, which account for 55.3%. So this is the biggest fashion retailer in the UK. And when we look at what's been happening to that, we see that from 1987 to 2002, the trend was for basically new stores to be opened mainly in town. Mostly in town shopping centres, but to some extent actually on you might call Main Street, 15% on Main Street. I've lost I should say small number of openings. I don't know what happened to that. At that time, there was only a small number of openings in out-of-town shopping centres and retail parks, really. But then suddenly, the whole thing shifts. From 2003, the majority of new stores are opening in retail parks, which represents 67% of new leases since 2003. So the fashion stores are changing. And remember, these are the fashions, the place like Next and Debenhams and John Lewis were selected, actually I should have said, because they were the ones who've brought in click and collect as a dominant part of their strategies. And when we interviewed them, they were saying, well, basically we've got to change. Debenhams say it very clearly. The problem is we've got all this dead space. We've got 1 million square feet of dead space, which is tied up in long leases. And what we want in the future is we're going to accommodate online and how shopping habits are changing. What we need is shops which are 30 to 40% smaller than when we spaced out we would have taken 30 or 40 years ago. So we're basically going to smaller shops. And also, given what we were saying about Next, it's the same with Debenhams. They're going to go to primarily out-of-town locations and retail parks, because that's where people can click and collect and pick up their goods very easily. So it's all moving towards decentralisation of along the lines that historically we've seen. So what we see that these big stores, that it's central to them, the online strategy. It's all about click and collect, and it's taking advantage of their networks. So they've got all these shops around around the country, and this means it's very easy for people to come and collect the stuff. And they also think that size is really important. I know we had the last presentation was about small retailers could actually get involved in online, but the big retailers think they've got a big advantage because they're the ones who've got the substantial capital to invest, and so they see themselves as the vanguard of online offerings. So they think they're in a better position than the smaller shops. And also the shops can then become showrooms, as someone was saying, and we have the sort of physical experience of going around the shops as well to enhance, to make it feel that it's more a leisure shopping experience. So the high street shop, these large retailers see themselves as having the fact they've got the physical retail experience as an important part of their actual forward strategy in terms of online sales. So you can combine the online sales with the sort of more spectacular shopping experience. John Lewis, another department store too, they highlight the importance of strong customer service because they're known for customer service, and they think this is an important aspect in terms of a competitive retailing environment. So the big shops see themselves as in the best position to differentiate themselves from the competition, and going forward think they've got lots of advantages. If we think about the wider impact of all this, online sales at 14% of the UK probably underestimates the magnitude of the effect, I think. It's occurred at a time of falling real income. So since the global financial crisis, GDP per capita has been falling in the UK, so has consumer spending. And so the argument is we need less shops. So you've got on the one hand 14% growth of online sales, but on the other hand you've got consumer spending falling in real terms, and the argument is that we need less shops. So it seems that how do we accommodate that? We've got high levels of I should have said we've got high levels of vacancies in our shops. Currently the vacancy rates are about 11%, 11.2%. They actually were up to about 14% in 2014, but have come down to about 11%, but still very high. And if you go to small towns, you can be talking about 20%. So and seen in the context of decentralisation, we've got Next, which is the largest high street, we call it the largest main street, if you like, high street UK fashion retailer. But as we saw earlier, most of its shops are actually in retail parks rather than town or city centres. So the main streets are losing out. The online is reinforcing, I think, the changes that have been happening over the years. So online retailing has tended to reinforce this decentralisation. So the small towns are losing out. The small towns are losing out through shopping opening in the retail parks, these power centres, or in the regional shopping centres. And you can see the attraction of the out-of-town retail parks because the click and collect stresses the convenience, and it's symbiotic with the out-of-town retail trend, with outlets offering convenient collection locations. And this was, so this as I say, is going in the same direction. We've got long-term trends in decentralisation from the car. Now the online revolution is sort of reinforcing that. So basically, even before the growth of online sales, major retail fashion brands were going into retail parks, and all this is just a reinforcement. So, repeating myself a little bit, historic trend towards decentralisation, click collect reinforces this. What has happened is the online purchases has meant that whereas the retail parks were originally designed for bulky goods and electrical goods, this has gone by the way, but unfortunately they've been replaced by the fact that the fashion shops have been moving into these retail parks because they want large floor areas and the convenience of people can park their car outside. Now, I think since we did this research, there are a number of things have happened. That there's been a huge wave of major brand closures and financial difficulties. It's interesting to see what's happening in America. It's exactly the same happening in the UK, 2017, 2018. A large number of these brands, big you call chain stores are closing. To some extent, it's the ones that have failed to interface with the internet that have gone under. Many are negotiating with their landlords to reduce their rents and are closing branches. So, up to now, it's been the high vacancies in the shopping centres. Shopping centres are still losing shops even more from this event, this wave of closures that's happening. But I think it's also happening to the retail warehouses. And I think the problem for shops is that the big chains now can service the whole of the UK with a smaller number of stores. They don't need such a big network of stores. So the networks are going to get smaller. That's going to have knock-on effects. So far it's been mainly in the main streets, if you like, rather than the retail parks, but I think it is coming to the retail parks too. So the pace of change is hotting up. It seems like on the retail size is, I know the previous speaker was saying a small retailer's got to get in on the act, but up to now it's been the large retailers which have been the ones who have been able to get in on the online market. It seems that we are going to have to retrench the amount of space we occupy. We've got excess space. I think if you take a crude fact, if there's 14% go online, you can say, well, we don't need 14% more, 14% of that space. But there's also the fact that you've got much of the retail space is obsolescence because it's too small. So we've definitely got too much excess space. We're going to have to find different uses for these shops. So I think the overall impact on the urban hierarchy is likely to be a continuation of the trends. But a shakeout, I think, is on the horizon, even more of a shakeout than has happened so far. So actually, that leaves me with just over a minute. I think it's me finished. Thanks very much.